On this special episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast, we have an exclusive interview with Pete Radovich of CBS Sports. Never before in the United States have we seen as much quality and quantity of coverage of the UEFA Champions League and Europa League as what CBS Sports have done. One of the key executives at the heart of this coverage is Pete Radovich, the coordinating producer of the UEFA coverage on CBS Sports, who also holds the position as CBS Sports' Senior Creative Director. Radovich, who is a 37-time Emmy Award winner, spoke to World Soccer Talk this week from London to discuss the Herculean task he and his team have undertook to get the Champions League and Europa League coverage ready for the United States. After all, don't forget that it was Turner Sports and Bleacher Report who dropped the coverage and handed the rights back to UEFA only a short while ago. So the turnaround time for CBS Sports was extremely tight. And it was Kartik Krishnaiyer, Kartik, who's joining me right here, who had the opportunity to speak to Pete Radovich. And what are some of the things, Kartik, that we can expect to hear in this interview that would be kind of enlightening or insightful for our audience?
I think several pieces. One, we're going to hear about how the talent team was assembled at CBS. We're going to hear about how the chemistry was developed between their studio talent. We're going to hear a lot about Clive Tyldesley and Peter Drury and what CBS was able to do to attract them to do these games for CBS exclusively, rather than taking the world feed or having Tyldesley and Drury potentially work for UEFA and do the world feed. And we're going to hear a lot also about Europa League, which is a more important piece of CBS's coverage of the Champions League, CBS's coverage of UEFA club competitions than it was for either Fox or Turner. So that to me was really interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit also about Rafa Honigstein, who has excelled in what is a elevated role for him. We very familiar with him on this side of the Atlantic from his work with The Guardian and his work with ESPN and ESPN FC and The Athletic. But this is Honigstein in a whole new, more prominent role, and it looks like we're going to get more of that, and it's come back with very good reviews both from CBS and from the viewers.
All right, Kartik, some good teasers there. So here's the interview with Pete Radovich, and then stick around post-interview for some of our thoughts about the insights that Pete shared.
Pete, thank you for joining us. Let's start talking about your London studio. It's gotten rave reviews to this point in the tournament. Obviously, you brought in some of the best and well-known talent that does this in the English language for UEFA Champions League and Europa League. Is this something you plan to continue using the studio in London as you go on beyond this summer coverage at the end of this tournament, or are you going to shift the studio somewhere else?
I think in the immediate future, yes. I can't speak for 4 years, but I can speak for October, which is only 2 months away, I believe, if my math is right. So the use of a studio in London for this upcoming Champions League campaign, definitely something that we are in right now planning to do, just because of the circumstances. First of all, we're happy with the results. We think it's worked out really well. I'm more than happy with being in Europe. Given my background, I kind of feel in some ways more comfortable here sometimes than I do at home in the States. So, I think it checks out on all fronts. Long term, beyond this coming season, that's something that we'll probably reevaluate after this upcoming season. But for the near future, without question, the plan is to continue as we've been doing this last few weeks.
Right. You don't have a quick turnaround between the end of this tournament and the start of qualifying has already begun, as we know, for Champions League. So effectively, it's one season running into another. So I think if we're going to expect changes, we would probably expect them after next June, June of 2020. 2021, excuse me.
Yeah, and that's not to say that we would even do it then. We may, it may go so well, we may just continue doing it. But the fun thing is that, we're learning as we go. It's as somebody that's in a creative business. I consider myself a creative. The challenges are fun sometimes, although they might not seem fun in the moment. But when you take a step back, the challenge of figuring out this October is kind of fun in its own way. So it's good. It's a good problem to have. I think if we do it in the States, we do it here. In the long term, it'll be great. We're doing Champions League. At the end of the day, we're doing Champions League, and that's the takeaway for me. Is that as a fan of this sport, as a former player of this sport, as someone that grew up in a family of soccer players, it's a little surreal that I'm even that we're at this point. So it's all good, and every problem is a good problem in my mind at this point.
CBS Sports HQ obviously has been running a concurrent pregame show for Champions League and Europa League with different personalities. We saw some integration of DeMarcus Beasley and CBS Sports HQ personnel with Champions League in discussing Tyler Adams, a couple of other points of integration. Are you going to look for next season and beyond to integrating your Connecticut studio team and the people who are working at CBS Sports HQ in the larger UEFA broadcasts?
I think when it works, we'll do it. Like DeMarcus Beasley worked for obvious reasons. But I think once we get, in a better place, I can definitely see us doing that a little, more often, given the challenges that we all had a month and a half ago, whatever it was, 40 days ago, roughly. The way it's been going, I'm pretty excited about on our front and on their front. So, but I definitely see us at some point doing a little bit more together.
Let's talk a little bit about your talent on the London side. Rafa Honigstein is someone American soccer fans, soccer viewers are very familiar with. He's an acclaimed author, acclaimed journalist, writer, and spent many years on the ESPN FC show talking about German football, transfer rumors, those sorts of things, Jurgen Klopp, et cetera, Thomas Tuchel, who, of course, we've seen we're going to see in the final as we record this. Did you guys envision this bigger role for him? Because I would say from my perspective, he's excelled. I mean, he's shown he can be an analyst, a co-commentator. He can do everything you need him to do in addition to reporting, in addition to doing post-match interviews, which he did in Munich after the Bayern-Chelsea match. This is a role that we haven't seen him in before. So what kind of prompted you to put him in this larger role, and did you know he'd be so successful?
Well, I mean, what prompted it was, his credentials, obviously, as you've mentioned. What frustrates me sometimes is because the German teams were doing so well with Bayern and Leipzig, it's kind of like, oh, we're just going to put our German guy on it. And that wasn't the intention. The intention is for him to speak to all of European football, which he's done at times. But because of the prominence of Leipzig and Bayern the last couple of days, it was obviously something that we needed him to speak to. But no, I did my research. I watched some YouTube pieces of him out in the field doing interviews with players. I realized we felt like that, I showed him to other people at CBS, and collectively we felt that this was someone that we could take a pretty calculated risk on. Giving a bigger role to. And plus the fact that I knew the personalities that were going to be around him. For example, yesterday, Jamie giving him a hard time about not wearing socks. I knew that's something that he typically wouldn't have. I talked to Ralph afterwards, and he loved it. He was surprised by it, but I think it's something that he's excited now to be a part of, sort of a regular, the core group. So, but to answer your question, I think, the research that we did, we felt that he had the personality, enough of a personality that he could be more than just a reporter. And it's worked out. It's worked out really well. And I'm excited to use him. We're sending, where he's flying to Cologne tomorrow to be our eyes and ears on the ground for the Europa League final. So we're going to have, not tomorrow. Well, he's flying, I think, tomorrow. We'll be on the air on Friday. So he'll again, Germany, because the game happens to be in Germany, but that's not why we're sending him. If the game would have been in Portugal, we would have sent, but he will be on the ground for us and reporting to our pregame and postgame with Jules Breach from there.
I think everybody would agree the banter in the studio has been top quality, has been phenomenal.
You also haven't, and I think this is really an important note for broadcasters when you talk about rights holders. You guys have not shied away from discussing controversial points about UEFA, about the tournament, about single leg versus two legs, which is the typical format we have, and even issues like financial fair play, allowing Jamie Carragher and Peter Schmeichel to kind of duke it out on that, Micah Richards to be involved in that conversation. Is there some place where you'll draw the line with your commentators in terms of controversy, or is it going to be like this from here on out? It's been a free-for-all, and I think it's been great for the viewers.
No, I mean, listen, I've been producing a show, Inside the NFL. It's a co-production of NFL and CBS. So I've been in those waters before where we're doing a studio show and talking about controversies whilst having a relationship with the league. So, we've hired people that have opinions. They're pretty intelligent. Not pretty, they're intelligent. They're well-spoken. They know how to get a point across without, I think, crossing any lines. So, to answer your question, I can't see myself ever telling talent what they can or can't say. I never have with the NFL either. So I can't see it happening here. There are issues with every sport, every league, every business in the world, and sometimes they have to be addressed. We've done that, and I don't see us stopping anytime soon. I'm not saying we're going to do an issues-based show where it's the focus of what we do, but when it warrants it, it'll come up.
Speaking of other sports, CBS has a litany of other things you've broadcast and covered. Most notably, of course, for most of our readers, listeners, would be NFL, PGA Tour golf, plus the Masters and PGA Championship, college basketball, and the SEC football. What have you taken from those products and integrated in this? Because I'll tell you, as someone who watches a lot of golf, especially on CBS, and watches Jim Nantz and Nick Faldo and that interaction, and listens to your other on-course commentators, I think the look and feel of Champions League and Europa League have been kind of similar to that. I mean, obviously the commentators are different, the issues are different, but it's a consistent look and feel, which I wasn't sure if with you guys having to have a turnkey production, it was going to have that CBS stamp. But for me, as someone who's watched CBS cover other sports for decades, it's got that.
Yeah, I think, the looking back at this, we had, I think, 28 days from the day we learned we were getting it to the first day we were on the air. So in those 28 days, we had to make a lot of very quick decisions on talent, on scheduling, on a lot of different things. And I think I feel like we've made some pretty good decisions. I'm not happy with a lot of them. One of them, what I think was the biggest, was that we decided that before we get on the air, that we do 2 full days of rehearsals. And really the purpose of that was to get our talent together and just have a hang for 2 straight days. And yes, it was a rehearsal technically to see how everyone looked on camera, but really for me, it was more of a chemistry building. My goal was in those 2 days for one, them to get to know one another, but 2, I kept conveying to them that this is not what you're used to. We are allowed to do. So we'd be in a meeting or we'd be at lunch and they would have a conversation, and I would say, you could do that on the air. And they'd look at we could. I said, everything you just said, everything you just did, you can do that on the air. And I think, in fact, not only can you do it, it's encouraged. The biggest thing for us is when you said that it feels and looks like CBS, it's definitely not an accident. It's definitely not a coincidence. That was something that was stressed. And again, I think those moments in those lunches, production meetings, hangs, where they were encouraged to bring that banter, bring that sort of spontaneous conversation in front of cameras, was something that I think I think a lot of them were surprised by. But also they were very happy to hear about it. They really were excited about the fact that we could sort of, take some chances and talk about things that they normally wouldn't talk about. Making fun of Rafa's socks or rolling in Micah hitting a home run the day before. Things like that are things that they never, never would do in their respective European shows. So, yeah, that was a really important part of what we were doing here, and I'm really happy with. They've really taken to it. Now they're coming to me with ideas. Hey, I've got this video of this, or what if we show this? So now they're all on board, and I think that's, again, like you pointed out, I think it's a big part of what we've done here, and I think that's why some people, it seems like people like it.
The Europa League, I've historically likened to being akin to the NIT, and it's something that I would compare. Well, look at how CBS covers the NCAA tournament, how ESPN covers the NIT. Heck, I'm old enough to remember when the NIT was on USA Network. About 30 years ago, when CBS, of course, had the NCAAs at that time, had it since the early 80s. You guys have done something with the Europa League we haven't seen done before on American television, or American streaming / television, which is full studio, kind of full wraparound coverage, post-match interviews, and you put the games on CBS Sports Network on tape delay, and I think every Europa League match, maybe save one of them, has been re-aired on CBS Sports Network, maybe all of them. So that's something we haven't seen on American television. So much coverage of this, what we've always thought of as a second-tier event, akin to the NIT. How did you guys come about that decision? Was that something that you did market research on, or just instinctively felt the tournament deserved that sort of coverage similar to the Champions League?
I grew up, a lot of my youth was spent in Croatia and Europe, and a lot of the teams out of Croatia and the former Yugoslavia would play in the Europa League.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
The UEFA, the UEFA League, and so it was something that was very familiar to me, and was, when you're from like a smaller club, smaller country, smaller league, it's important. And it's, you're not going to compete in the semifinals of a Champions League if you're a team from Croatia, a team from, I don't know, from a smaller
Romania, those sorts of places.
Ukraine, some of these smaller leagues, it's really tough. So I've always had a special place in my heart for Europa League, UEFA. And so when I realized that we were doing both, I asked, can we sort of focus on that as well? And honestly, I didn't expect it to be, Inter and Sevilla and Man U. I mean, we knew Man U could make a run there, but it's been great. I mean, last night I left the studio. I left the Champions League studio, and I saw Roberto Martinez in a hallway, and I said, "You good for Friday for Europa League?" He said, "Peter, this is a Champions League match. This is going to be amazing." I said, "I know. I'm excited about it." So I think we got a little lucky with just how good the games the games have been and the matchups we've had. But from the beginning, the marketing research was really growing up watching it as a kid, and the fact that we could be a part of it, to me, was I made a pretty hard sell early on that this is something that we should really pay attention to. It's never been paid attention, as far as I know. It really hasn't gotten a lot of coverage in the U.S. I don't remember it getting a lot of coverage. But yeah, the NIT, when this process still first started, I use that analogy all the time when I was kind of explaining to people like what the Champions League is, what the Europa League is, and that an NIT analogy I use all the time. But it's a little different. So one thing is, if you win the NIT, you automatically qualify for the NCAA tournament the next year. That's pretty cool. And it's not exactly the NIT. It would be a notch above the NIT. It's still prestigious. Yeah. But the best, easiest analogy, yes, would be that one.
The hiring of match commentators, we have to say, has been brilliant. In Clive Tyldesley and Peter Drury, you brought two of the definitive voices in the English language. I mean, two of the guys that I think everybody knew that was tuning in. I mean, there was a familiarity about it, particularly Drury, because he's called Premier League matches for so long on other networks in the U.S. and for the international feed. How difficult was it, one, to secure those two guys? And obviously Jim Beglin as the team with Tyldesley is a guy that they've worked together for many years, again, Champions League and Premier League, among other things. How difficult was it to secure those guys? And now how easy is it to program with those guys?
Well, a lot of things broke our way. It was relatively easy, I'll be honest. It was sort of like, the first thing we did was we figured out, all right, who's already working Champions League and who's not available. And then you you end up with a list of people that aren't working for Champions League for, say, BT or anyone else. And then the other thing is that because of the situation we're in, very few people are going on holiday.
Yeah.
So, they're not working because they're not doing Champions League, and it's the only thing on the air right now. They're not going on holiday because of the pandemic. So I'll be honest, like those calls, those hires happen very quickly. In fact, all the hires happened pretty quickly. And what happened was, we focused primarily on the studio, not primarily, we focused only on the studio. We were originally the plan was to take the world feed because we just didn't have enough time to do studio and game. And what happened was the studio fell into place so quickly that we found ourselves like, all right, what's next? And then it's like, oh, let's take a stab at the game analysts, see, play-by-play commentary and see how that goes. And then sure enough, it went pretty quickly. And I think it's a lot of things broke our way. The schedule broke our way. The fact that it was in the summer, the fact that nobody was working on anything else, the fact that the pandemic, the fact that people like being on the air in America, I think played into a lot of this as well. And CBS's profile is very high over here. Surprisingly, when I tell people or mention CBS, I'm surprised how familiar they are with the network. But yeah, so I think all those things helped us, and it wasn't. I'll be honest, it wasn't very difficult. It was pleasantly, and even them. I mentioned the talent. Working with the talent. Everyone is just across the board. It's just amazing. It really is amazing how nice, happy to be here, friendly, easy to work with. Everybody is from top to bottom, behind, in front of the cameras and behind.
Yeah, my historic experience in Britain in particular is everybody knows CBS because they know the news division. They know Morrow, they knew Morrow, they knew Cronkite, they know 60 Minutes. So, yeah, it's a brand name for sure. And we saw that with the way Clive Tyldesley and Peter Drury kind of introduced themselves the first match day that they worked, that we're on American network television. This is a big, big deal.
Yeah, they were excited. Both of them were very excited. I'd say of all the talent, they may have been the most excited to be on CBS. So it's cool that you could see that they were truly. It was a big deal for them. So that was cool.
Yeah, my last question is on that front also. So we talked about Drury and Tyldesley and the match commentators. Next year, we assume we're going back to the more traditional format, home and away ties, two-leg ties, group stage. Group stage was the same this year, but obviously for your broadcasting purposes, you didn't broadcast a group stage. Does that complicate getting the match commentators in person around to matches, or do you guys still plan to have them live and at the match, and also having reporters? Like you mentioned, Rafa Honigstein, you've had Alex Scott, Peter Schmeichel on site at various matches.
No, listen, I don't know because I haven't done this yet. We're figuring out step by step. We're like, it's what's the next thing we have to do. Let's tackle it. I haven't put too much thought into it, but I do know that once commentators are allowed in stadiums, we absolutely plan on having them on site. I do know that we'll continue having reporters on site, similar to the way we have Alex and Peter Schmeichel in Portugal. And I do know that even our studio will hit the road once we're allowed on occasion for a big game. That's something I really look forward to. The day where there's full stands and we're on the sidelines and doing it, the way it's meant to be. But for now, this has been great. It's been a quick, great Band-Aid for the situation we're in. But yeah, I think once things normalize, we'll do it the right way. We'll have our commentators on site and we'll have reporters on site. And, when we can, obviously we're not going to do it with every match. And we'll also have our studio on site when we can.
So thank you to Pete Radovich and CBS Sports for setting up that interview for us. Pete, we know, is a big fan of the podcast, regular listener, so it was a pleasure to have him on to speak with us. Now, Kartik, out of all the things that Pete covered, I mean, there's a lot there. What was your biggest takeaway from that interview?
one, that CBS is really committed to doing this the right way, giving it a CBS feel, and doing it long term this way. Two, that CBS was so serious about this that in the 28 days they had between acquiring the rights and going to air, they did just about everything right. They got the top tier talent, and they were very, very committed to having this go off as well as it has. Even the fact that he's relocated to London for this expresses a level of seriousness and a breadth of how important this is for CBS Sports, the entire CBS Sports division. So that to me was pretty interesting to hear. Also, the prominence and importance of the Europa League, the fact that they're continuing to do these wraparound shows for the Europa League, pregame and post-match, and that they continue to look at how they can improve as they've gotten into this mode of having to do matches every day, do them quickly, produce a show just about every day. We've had very few breaks since the Champions League and Europa League resumed, and even the addition of new talent like Jermaine Genius midstream. So it was to me very enlightening, and you get a sense of how important this property is to CBS Sports, which is something that I think is great to hear, because on this show, Chris, and in print and just in general conversations among soccer fans, we always wondered why CBS seemed to not ever have the sort of interest in soccer other networks in the U.S. did. So now they've gone in headfirst with NWSL and UEFA club competitions this summer, and you see and hear how important it is to them.
You have to wonder, Kartik, as far as the future, what the future holds for CBS Sports. Are they interested in Major League Soccer rights? They're coming up. The bidding will start next year. Would they be interested in putting in a bid for the Premier League? Really, the sky's the limit in terms of the possibilities that they have if they want to go down those paths, because they could definitely put in some serious bids for those competitions and others too. It's amazing, though, in such a short amount of time, how much they've done, how much they've accomplished. Because we, as the viewer, I mean, we watching these games, I think most of us listening and I mean many others too, probably are watching more pre-game coverage and more post-game coverage for the UEFA Champions League and the Europa League, probably more than ever before. And that's the thing, though, too. It's not only is it CBS Sports and CBS All Access, but it's also CBS Sports HQ. I mean, HQ usually is doing about 2 hours of pre-game coverage, which is completely different than what CBS Sports All Access is doing, or CBS All Access is doing. So depending on which one, if you're somebody who enjoys listening and getting the analysis from Ian Joy and DeMarcus Beasley and Jimmy Conrad and Danny Higginbotham and many others there, you can get that for free. Or you can get CBS All Access and then get the Roberto Martinez, the Rafa Honigstein, Julian Lorenz, who we saw this week, Jermaine Genius. It's amazing the amount of possibilities and options that we have available to us. At the same time, I mean, the Univision numbers are through the roof. They're doing wonderful too with what they're accomplishing. But in the past, where I kind of always felt like, okay, I would go back to Univision because either the Fox coverage wasn't that good or the Turner coverage wasn't that good, or sometimes it was technical problems and I would go back to watching it on Univision. So far for this Champions League and Europa League, I haven't done that once. But Kartik, what about CBS Sports HQ? I mean, we didn't really talk about that in the interview, but what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's great complimentary coverage that you get from CBS Sports HQ, and you get some real kind of feel of I would call it more kind of deeper dive analysis and some different perspectives on there, and obviously some more American perspectives with the likes of DeMarcus Beasley being on there, Christina Unkel, etc. But you got some really important information out of there. Jonathan Johnson being on that. CBS Sports HQ from the get-go was really critical when we saw the deep runs that two Ligue 1 clubs made in this Champions League. Lyon getting to the semifinals, PSG to the finals. So that was a great coup. in addition, I think that there's a kind of more newsy feel about CBS Sports HQ, just the way it sets up. So it's almost like a great place to go to get a team sheets, get kind of thoughts about news as it breaks from the match sites. It has a very Sky Sports News feel to it, not in necessarily the level of analysis. I think CBS Sports HQ does a better job of that, but in kind of the way it's presented. Whereas CBS All Access or CBS Sports Network, the Kate Abdo studio team, has more of a Sky Sports feel. And for those who haven't spent time in the UK, there is a definitive difference between Sky Sports News and Sky Sports and presentation and how they present things. So I think that that's the divide in terms of, and it's not really a divide, they complement each other, but that's the difference between the two pregame and post-match shows.
The other thing too is that CBS Sports, CBS All Access have done a good job of actually at times integrating them both together. So, for example, I think it was last week where we had DeMarcus Beasley interviewing Tyler Adams or talking to Tyler Adams. And DeMarcus we've seen several times on CBS Sports HQ. He's one of the main guys there. And on CBS All Access, we had Tyler Adams talking to his hero, DeMarcus Beasley, talking about how Tyler Adams, DeMarcus was his role model. DeMarcus was somebody that he always looked up to. And they spoke live on camera about how they never met each other. I think they kind of crossed paths, but never actually met each other. And that was good. That was a good integration between the two. We haven't seen a ton of the integration, but in the future, I think, from what I understand, when it works, we'll see more of that. But that was good too. Lastly, Kartik, I know there's been the CBS All Access almost every day. There's been something different. It's always enlightening. It's always insightful. But the person I've been most impressed with from this past week, I mean, overall, I think Roberto Martinez is the number one. But for me, the person that's impressed me the most from this past week has been Jermaine Genius, both as a co-commentator, but also as an analyst. He is really, really good, top level.
Yeah, so that didn't surprise me. Before BBC World took it off, they had a show, and I'm forgetting the name of it, but a show that would air at 5:30 UK time every Saturday that Jermaine Genius was on, and I watched that for a few years. Right after Genius' playing career ended, actually, he went right into studio punditry and was quite good on that program. And then I remember when I've traveled to India or traveled to the UK or Dubai, I've seen him on BBC World Service, and he's been very, very good. So that didn't surprise me. What is really important for CBS in adding Genius is that he can serve both that studio pundit role and he can serve a co-commentator role, which gives a versatility that I think is really important for them as they keep moving through this. And that's the sort of versatility that quite honestly, Fox and Turner were able to take advantage of with Stu Holden. Maybe Turner didn't take advantage of it enough because they paired him with Steve Nash, right? And they had him service as the lead commentator, but that you need those sorts of versatile figures on your team. And so Genius can plug in to studio conversations. He can also do match commentary, which is helpful for them. We'll see how they use him going forward after this year's tournament, because obviously one of the things that I talked about, that we talked about in this interview, was that with the home and away format next year, and we're back to group stages, CBS has never broadcast a group stage. There are some different challenges in how you spread your personnel and how you use your studio. And they appear like they're prepared for that, but we may see some of these individuals in different roles, is my guess, as we get to the group stage next season and then the knockout stage, which will be the traditional, barring another, we can never be too sure in this world as it is in 2020, but barring another shutdown like this year, home and away format throughout from the round of 16 to the semifinals.
One more thing from this interview, Kartik, and that is the question that you asked, which I thought was a great question, about what has CBS taken from other sports that CBS carries in terms of whether it's golf or other sports. And I think in many ways too, I think CBS Sports in terms of the soccer coverage, they've definitely taken some of the rule book from NBC Sports. They've definitely taken some of the rule books from ESPN as far as the World Cup coverage in the past, blended those two together and amped it up big time, and then added the CBS stamp on there. Overall, I think it's the magic formula of what they've created. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things, Chris, that they like is studio banter. I've seen that on, or even banter between commentators, which I've seen on their golf coverage, and then the studio banter on their March Madness coverage and some of their college football coverage. So I don't watch the NFL, but I believe that that's a trademark of their NFL coverage also. So that's been imparted here. We've seen Jamie Carragher playing that role a lot, right? Of antagonist on the studio team, and then they've taken like the kind of superior production level, not just camera shots, but graphics, putting graphics in at the right time, not these kind of loud, over-the-top graphics like we used to have on Fox.
Obnoxious, right?
Yeah, obnoxious graphics, and not the chicken scratch or whatever you want to call what Turner did. I mean, I'll take the Fox graphic over Turner. So I think that they've taken the kind of production levels and studio banter that they've had in the in CBS Sports American productions of U.S. sports, and then imparted it into a soccer broadcast, which I think they've perfected, looking a lot at NBC and looking a lot at ESPN. And they also, I should mention, in their golf coverage, anyone who follows golf knows CBS has a number of foreign accents on their golf coverage, whether it's Nick Faldo, who's their lead analyst, who's obviously English, and they have guys like David Faraday, who's Northern Irish, and they've had Australians on their coverage, they've had other Englishmen on their coverage. So I think that they know how to integrate those accents into soccer coverage. So one of the things that I thought about in asking the question specifically about golf was CBS does not have the experience covering Olympics and covering all these international events that NBC does, which made NBC's transition to broadcasting the Premier League maybe a little more seamless. They knew what Formula One was like. They had done the Olympics for however many cycles by the time they acquired the Premier League rights. But then I realized, and they covered in golf the international events, the Ryder Cup, the President's Cup. But I realized CBS, even though they don't cover a single PGA Tour event from outside North America, all the events on the tour that end up in Europe, or the World Golf Championship event that's in Asia, end up on NBC. But they have integrated those foreign voices, because golf is an international game, into their coverage. So that maybe gave them a template for what to do with soccer.
And just before we go, Kartik, I do have to mention that my favorite part of that interview was with Pete Radovich talking about having basically meetings or dinners with the talent, and they were talking about some of the fun things, some opinions that they had, and Pete was saying, like, everything you just did, we can do on air. And they were like, what? Really? We can do that? Like, yeah, this is CBS Sports. We do things differently. This is American television. We do things differently. And I think I got a little sense of the difference between Americans and the British. I mean, the British is a little bit more reserved in terms of being on air, a little bit tighter, a little bit more, not professional, but just a little bit more reserved, versus the American, where it's more let loose, kind of show your emotions, have a little bit of fun. And that's something we've seen from this for the last 2 weeks of the CBS Sports' coverage of the UEFA Champions League and the Europa League. Is there's been a fun factor to it too, as well as the serious analysis. So whether it's Micah Richards or Alex Scott or Peter Schmeichel, you can go down every single person on that talent list. And I think everyone's having fun, and it shows. And then for me as a viewer, I'm watching that and I'm laughing with them. And it's quite different than what we had with Turner Sports, where Turner Sports were having jokes in between breaks, and they'd come back from a break and have kind of inside jokes that the viewer was like, what are they talking about? This is not funny. I have no idea why they're laughing so much. And that's a huge difference too. So it's been an enjoyable... It's only been 2 weeks, Kartik. It's only been 2 weeks, but it's been an enjoyable viewership. So thank you for doing the interview. We'll be back tomorrow with our regular podcast. And don't forget, Friday we've got the Europa League final, which should be amazing. And then Sunday we've got the UEFA Champions League final. And then they've got a small break before they come back right at it. So thanks for listening and all the best. And Kartik, any send-off words?
Enjoy your football.